I sent out a blast to every member of Congress, encouraging them to co-sponsor the Stop Arming Terrorists Act. It was my version of what you went through with the petition. Very small handful of members of Congress actually signed on to this legislation.
Why do you think that is?
What I imagine is they tell themselves, well, this dictator's a bad guy and we got to take him out. And well, if we got to work with these people or those people, then that'll help us to get there. And then they don't actually think it through. I can't come up with a rational, logical argument about why they would refuse to sign legislation called the Stop Arming Terrorists Act. Either they are ignorant and choose to be ignorant, or they believe that the ends justifies the means. They are not rooted in reality. When you look at the real consequences of their policies and their decisions, it turns out time and time again to be an outcome that is counter to the best interest of our security and the interests of the American people.
I have a Patreon account. They're our top supporters. They've been here since the beginning. One of the things that I offer them is the opportunity to ask each guest a question. Historically, you are for the reduction of military spending and overall downsizing. What is your stance on that now with the current administration's open border policy in relation to an attack inside the United States, being we have a few 100,000 undocumented military-age men who will be responsible for the safety of Americans?
We should have the military that we need to ensure our safety, security, and freedom. There should be an audit, which has not been done, of the Department of Defense, and an assessment of how are we spending our taxpayer dollars, and are those dollars being spent making us more safe? Anybody who says that the Department of Defense is not bloated and spending far more than they should hasn't been paying attention to what's going on in the Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. We don't have any idea how many people have streamed through our borders illegally who pose that direct threat to us here on our own soil. I was in Southern California, San Diego, and spent a couple days down at the border there just to see for myself. A lot of people talk about Texas and Arizona. Very few people are paying attention to what's going on in San Diego. What I saw was astounding to me. We came upon these like little camps almost of illegal immigrants, more and more people walking up just as I was there. So you hear about the gotaways on the news all the time. Well, how many gotaways are there? These are people coming across the border, knowing exactly where to go for Border Patrol to pick them up. And they sit there, peaceful, calm, cell phones, candy, snacks, chilling, waiting for Border Patrol to pick them up because they know that Border Patrol will come, load them in the vans, they'll go to the processing center, and they'll walk out with that white piece of paper says that they've claimed asylum, and they are no longer undocumented. They are now documented, and they get a plane ticket to go anywhere in the country where they want to go. But I remember going to this reception that one of the leaders of the Democratic caucus was hosting, and I didn't know until I got there that it was a reception where every lobbyist in town was invited to meet the new members of the Democratic caucus, and there were 50 in my group. So I got there and I was looking around and went to go stand in line to get like a soda or whatever from the bar. There's like 20 or 30 people in line. And this guy was in front of me, he's like, "Hey, how are you? What's your name?" And I introduced myself, and he saw my name tag and it said Congresswoman-elect. And he's like, "What are you doing in line?" It's like, "Same thing you are. I'm waiting in line to get a drink." He's like, "Okay, let me tell you how this place works. You are now a member of Congress, and you will never stand in line in this town ever again, as long as you're in office." I remember that to this day because it really took me aback. And of course, I stood in line. I'm not gonna, "Oh, well, thank you very much. Let me just go cut to the head of the line here." What's wrong is they forget their purpose for being there, and that purpose being to serve the people in our country and support and defend the Constitution. The people that you see on TV, politicians, people who are elected into office, it's no different than you and me. We should set our expectations as such and hold each other accountable as such.
Well, I don't think there's any holding each other accountable inside Congress. In my very limited snapshot exposure, I'm there every couple months. I notice the arrogance immediately. And some people know who I am. I'll get introduced and it's, "Hey, this is Sean, former Navy SEAL." They could give two shits. Former CIA contractor, don't care. Ranked as high as number 2 on the podcast charts in the world. Now all of a sudden they want to be my friend. And I'm just like, fuck you.
Yeah.
What I've noticed is none of these people go back to their districts. They all stay in D.C. for the parties.
The law that Gavin Newsom just signed into
Oh,
law, the
man.
bill that he just signed into law, taking away parents' rights in the most fundamental way to make it so that the state of California gets to make the decision to allow your child to undergo irreversible mutilation surgery in the name of quote unquote gender affirming care.
Things like that are a big reason why people feel hopeless.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily how do we hold the politicians accountable. For somebody that doesn't believe that, like myself, who I'm conservative, I have views on both sides of the aisle, but I will never, ever agree with the gender stuff with kids. When I hear that, it registers in my brain that every single person that voted blue is for that.
It's not true.
What is more sacred than
I agree.
than little kids?
Yeah. Being elected and having no money, and you make what, 160 grand a year or whatever the salary is now, to literally becoming multimillionaires. That is the most obvious way. But the reality is you're in a position where you're making decisions either in committee or on the House floor that influence our markets, that influence the outcomes of certain industries, either causing some to tank or others to skyrocket. And the mere perception of insider trading shouldn't exist. I think it would be a little hard, not impossible, but a little hard if somebody's just coming and bringing you a sack of cash.
Okay.
Could a lobbyist go and pay the tuition for your kid to go to a fancy private school?
Makes sense.
Maybe. The cleanup has required digging many, many layers below the surface to get out all of the toxic material before people can begin to go in and start to apply for the permits that they'll need to start rebuilding.
Do you think this was on purpose?
I don't. I'm saying that not just because of belief, but because I went there. Thankfully, I was able to take leave and get back to Maui as quickly as possible. I think it was the second or third day after the fires, and I wanted to know what happened. And speaking to the firefighters, the convergence of events that resulted in these hurricane speed winds funneling through the valley essentially turned this situation into what they described as a horizontal blowtorch that then went directly across that side of the island and within minutes razing everything that was in its path. Pedophilia is pedophilia. Period. Full freaking stop. As you said, if we're not willing to stand up for the most vulnerable among us in our children, what are we doing?
I feel like people standing up for the kids with the pedophilia and the gender affirming care. And yeah, guess what? Maybe your 8-year-old does want to be the opposite gender. It's an 8-year-old.
Exactly.
He also wants to be a pilot. And he wants to be an astronaut.
Exactly.
And he wants to be a YouTuber or whatever.
I was like a tomboy of tomboys growing up. I had short hair, wore like boys' shorts and t-shirts everywhere I went. If I were growing up today, whether through public schools or social media, I guarantee you that external push and pressure would have been there. We're like, oh, well, obviously you like to do the things that the boys are doing. They would have told me, well, you're obviously stuck in the wrong body. Like, let us help you feel more at home. Like, whatever. The nonsense and the bullshit that they're seeding into our kids' minds. And I questioned Secretary Mattis in an open hearing, why aren't we going after Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria? Because the focus was on regime change, not on defeating Islamist terrorism at that time. His answer was, it's complicated, period.
Wow.
This is what I see as a common affliction in so much of, you can call it the deep state, permanent Washington, the national security state, people in the State Department, the Department of Defense. They get so lost in these complexities that they have created for themselves that somehow justify a position that is not good for our country. It's not complicated why we're not going after Al-Qaeda in Syria. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
There's a reason for it. We have our military there. Why are you not prioritizing them going after and defeating this Islamist terrorist group that attacked us on 9/11? Even though they may not say, well, I believe that there should be no borders in the world and kind of a one world philosophy, I go back to the 2020 Democratic primary, where the vast majority of Democrats who are running for president in 2020 believed that crossing the border should result in a civil fine that would equate getting a parking ticket. That's an open border. Ever since Trump ran for president in 2016, painted him and anyone else who called for securing our borders and an end to illegal immigration, xenophobes and racists. So it makes it hard for them now to say, okay, well, this is way over the top. We have to secure our borders. We have to stop illegal immigration. Well, okay, so are you now racist? Also, do you also hate brown people now? Because that's the situation that they've created. And then even most recently, you saw with J.D. Vance's wife speaking, on the stage at the Republican convention. Today's Democrat Party is doing everything that they can to try to erase God from every facet of our public life.
I don't care if you think I'm
and going after and targeting people of faith and spirituality, which directly defies our First Amendment and our freedom of religion. I'm not saying you should believe what I believe or casting judgment on anyone. It's not that. It's about the Constitution and recognizing that our government should not be weaponized against people of faith and spirituality. And that freedom of religion does not mean that God does not exist in our public life at all. It means I get to express my love for God, my faith in God in the way that I choose, whether it be in private or in public at the time of my choosing. And another person who is an atheist also has the freedom to express their views.